soldier, strange to call you unknown. You are the most known of the war dead, but the 1418 war is full of irony, not least it being called the War to End War. Since the 11th of the 11th, 1918, hardly a day has gone by without a war being fought somewhere. When, having accepted the shilling the King kindly offered, you set off for the Western Front, did you spot the irony? The Western Front is east, not west, of Blighty, although there was of course an Eastern Front, but that was more eastern than the Western one, and having two Eastern Fronts might have confused the punters. When you fired your first shot, did you think of the young men you might kill, or were they just the enemy? Did you know that they, like you, believed Gott mit uns, God with us? If you were wounded and made it to hospital, you might have been labelled no hope and simply left to die. I bet that before you went over there, to go over the top, they didn't tell you that the army medic's first duty is to patch up the least, not the most, seriously injured. That gives soldiers another chance to kill, or be killed. Those at home might have wondered if you died quick and if you died clean. Telling the home folk about deaths that were slow and obscene was bad for morale. Ironically, that left thousands of the bereaved wondering, fretting, and trying to find out what had actually happened by writing awkward letters to the authorities. It's funny to think that hundreds of families whose loved one had a known grave begged to bring him back to dear old Blighty, yet you, an unknown soldier, drew the only prize. You were buried as unknown. Rudyard Kipling hadn't yet decided that the unknown were known, at least unto God. Strange that, at least for the unknown who were atheists. Were you? Hope not, otherwise the pomp and ceremony of your Christian burial would have been a bit embarrassing. Do you know that you nearly missed out on being catapulted from obscurity to famous anonymity? Initially, King George wasn't keen on your coming home, but Army Chaplain Railton convinced him at the 11th hour. Having dug you up from the Western Front, or to be precise, the less eastern or more western of the two Eastern Fronts, you came home aboard HMS Verdun. Funny that. After all, the bloody Battle of the Somme was really only cooked up to relieve pressure on the French at Verdun. In Dover, your coffin was popped into a humble luggage van, number 132. Still, the nation's most famous heroine, Edith Cavell, had warmed it up 18 months earlier, as she came home in it too. After she was executed, enlistment peaked, briefly postponing conscription. Conscription, introduced in 1916, ended voluntary military service, which was one of the great British freedoms you and your mate were fighting to defend. I'll tell you why Edith's execution was in fact legal in my next letter. I know you like getting letters because there's a bit on the postcards you send home where you tick that you received your letter dated. Of course, if you're dead by the time my letter arrives, they'll send it back with the word killed helpfully scrawled across it. In London, your gun carriage was pulled by 6 conscripted old blacks, ex-artillery horses who had seen action. By the way, horses were conscripted from day one. These horses that pulled the gun carriage represented the 250,000 horses killed in the war. A nation of animal lovers was as careless of its animals as of its young men's lives. I bet you see the irony of that. As you approached the cenotaph, the nation's stiff upper lip finally wobbled. Sobs filled the air. Homecomings are supposed to be joyful, yet yours was awash with tears. Did your own dear mum put some flowers at the cenotaph? Her bouquet could have been bought with pennies she could ill afford. The nation's gratitude to our glorious dead did not extend to generous pensions for their dependents. Or perhaps Mamma's blooms came from the mansion that you should have inherited, but which would now have to be sold to pay death duties. Rich or poor, although you might have been saving the nation, your death cost your family dear. 2 minutes' silence at the cenotaph was, and remains, your and your comrades' lot. A year has 525,600 minutes. Allowing you only a couple seems miserly. Even this 2 minutes silence idea is no longer exclusively yours, but at least it was yours first, and yours occur annually, at the 11th hour on the 11th day of the 11th month. A satisfying symmetry. Anyway, after the cenotaph, it was on to your big event in the Abbey, with all those kings, princes, generals, saluting you. How embarrassing, if you were just a private, which you might well have been. We think of you as a warrior, but we actually don't know what you did or how you died. You might have been taking up the rations when you suffered death by Dixie, but an army marches on its stomach, so your country needed you. Of course, your tombstone says you had done good, rather than you were brave, but the idea of bravery has stuck in our minds. Now at a railway station most closely associated with a bear from darkest Peru than with troop trains, you are immortalised. It'd be great if, rather than being tucked away down platform 1, you actually were on the main concourse, reminding us of what you did. But I suppose with health and safety, the need to maximise valuable retail space, and commuters rushing for tubes and trains, there'd be no time to stand and stare at the very person who helped save our great British way of life. So thanks, mate. You did your bit for all of us.